Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review of Transfigurations, which is episode 25 of season 3 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the episode Transfigurations. So Transfigurations is the episode in which the Enterprise discovers a crashed ship on a shuttle with a man near death who Beverly saves his life. However, he wakes up with amnesia and without knowing anything about who he is or where he came from, and so his past is mysterious, and he's able to magically heal people as he heals O'Brien's dislocated shoulder, and he gives Jordy confidence enough to hook up with a chick, and he accidentally, as his powers are getting out of control, he accidentally kills Warf as he falls off a balcony, but then he's able to use his powers to heal him immediately and bring him back to life. But nobody knows why this is happening, and then they try to take him home, but instinctively he doesn't want to go home. But when the Enterprise encounters a ship of his species, they say that he's a criminal and they demand that he be returned for execution. Now, for obvious reasons, which should be obvious, apparently not obvious to everyone, but for obvious reasons, Picard doesn't want to return this innocent man to be murdered, but illegally doesn't really have a reason not to. So he asks for more information from the commander, who refuses to give it, saying it's none of their concern. Then Picard asks him about the strange abilities that this person has been showing, and the alien then comes to the conclusion that Picard has been corrupted by him, and so they try to somehow choke every single person on board the Enterprise and steal their oxygen and kill them. However, John Doe uses his magical healing abilities to save everyone, and then he has he has evolved into a energy being who now has a very unlimited powers, and he remembers everything that members of his species have been evolving into a higher life form, and that Suna and the other aliens who want him dead are afraid of this power, and they simply want to kill them because they fear what they don't understand. However, it's too late because John Doe has now evolved to a higher being, and he instantly stops the puny aliens who run away from him in fear, and thanks Beverly and the Enterprise crew for saving him and saying that they made it possible, and he goes off in an energy light beam back to his planet to help all the other people evolve to a higher plane of existence. So I got another question about this episode, and am I the only one who likes this episode? I'm not. I did go on IMDb, and I forgot what rating was IMDb, but it wasn't that low. Let me check again. It was a 6.9, which is not a particularly high rating, but it's not the lowest. As I said, there's several episodes that have a 6.5 of season 3, and the price was the lowest one of season 3 with the 6.3, and there's other seasons that have even lower. I think Shades of Grey was like a 3.9 or something, but I think that's the lowest of the show, to be fair. But anyway, but there's many episodes with like a 5 point something, so 6.9 is not too bad. And I read the user reviews of Transfigurations, and there was several people who really liked it. There were some people who gave it 10 out of 10, but I think they're just being overzealous. And there were some positive user reviews, and so now that comforted me, because when I went on YouTube and watched the usual channels that I usually watch reviews from, they hated this episode. They eviscerated it. And then I read some written articles online as well, and they also did not like this episode very much. And so it seemed like everyone hated this episode, which was a surprise to me. It's news to me, because growing up, this was one of my favorite episodes. Now, granted, I didn't like it as much as, say, The Vengeance Factor or The Alternative Factor or, the other ones I like, Future Imperfect and Clues. And I didn't like them for as long. Because, so when I first started watching Star Trek, TNG, before I saw all the episodes, like Future Imperfect and Clues were my favorite episodes. But it wasn't until maybe several years later, after I saw the episodes of TNG, while, say, Season 6 was airing, that I liked The Vengeance Factor and The Alternative Factor. And this episode, I think, came after that I started to really like it. Maybe while I was watching Season 2 of DS9 and Season 7 of TNG. Or maybe after that even, that I found this episode, even though I've seen it before. I've, decided that I actually loved it and would put it in my top 30s and say this is a great TNG episode. Now, such is the case with the other episodes. As I grew older, I kind of didn't love this episode as much as I used to, but I still like it a lot. And so, when I saw that, now if you know the channel Lore Runner, I talk about him a lot because I like his channel. It's a great channel. He's really good at analyzing Star Trek episodes. If you haven't watched his channel, I'd highly recommend it. That's not to say I always agree with him, but I think it's a great channel and I love what he does. But, he does this thing when he calls his videos on episodes ruminations, but when it's an episode that he thinks has no value whatsoever and is devoid of any sort of value, and it's like the worst of the worst, he doesn't call it a rumination, he calls it a lamentation. And you can tell by the thumbnail because the color is inverted and it says lamentation instead of rumination. And that's for the worst of the worst. Like examples of episodes, it's like Threshold, I think, is the first one out of one of the more classic ones he did before, and like Code of Honor or Up the Long Ladder. Like episodes like that would be lamentation. And when his video came out for this episode, it was a lamentation. I remember seeing that and being shocked. I was simply that. Out of all the ones he chose to be the Lamentations, it's not the one I disagree with the most. That's The Alternative Factor, but I was expecting it because everyone hates that episode, even though they shouldn't. But I was expecting that, even though it pissed me off. It wasn't surprising. But this one, out of all the Lamentations he gave, definitely shocked me the most. I'm like, really? Like, you don't give Manhunt a lamentation, but you give this a lamentation? Like, seriously? Like, and this is the first time I heard of people really not liking this episode, because I always did like this episode. I think I'm a kind of a sucker for, like, these new age belief things, kind of like why I like Where No One Has Gone Before. And Haven, which a lot of other people didn't like Haven. But that I understood. That I knew that people didn't like that episode. I didn't know that people didn't like this one. Well, to be fair, it wasn't the only episode I was shocked to learn people hated. There was also Move Along Home, DS9, which I always liked, and I was shocked to find people hated that. But this one took me longer. It wasn't until Lore Runner's video that I found out that people didn't like it. I had no idea. Anyway, because I like these sort of new age message things. Now, I've read several user reviews on IMDb, and some other critics as well, which referred to John as a Jesus figure. Now, honestly, I think it's people who are religious in nature, or just think of religion a lot, would make that analogy, because I would not. In fact, I would be as bold to say that it's a false analogy, that it doesn't really hold. That because, and I always say that, if you believe in Jesus, you believe in religion, that's fine. I'm not saying anything about telling you what to think, but I only say that as false, it's incorrect, it's inaccurate, I suppose would be the better term, is because it's very clearly New Age beliefs. And maybe that's because I know about Roddenberry, know about Star Trek, I know the pattern about him sort of inserting his New Age beliefs into Star Trek, with the Traveler was the biggest example, and Where No One Has Gone Before. But there are other examples, like Haven is another one. And this is obviously another one. Now, some might argue that Roddenberry wasn't really involved in this episode that much, because this is when his health started failing him. But I'm sure he had some influence. He definitely did. But to be fair, Michael Piller is also a bit New Agey as well. He inserted some of his yoga beliefs, like in All Good Things. He said he came up with the idea for that episode when he was doing yoga. So he's also a little bit New Agey, so it could also be Michael Piller. But yeah, it's definitely the New Agey thing about ascending to a higher plane and, healing people and people, evolving into these glowy beings. That's not Jesus. That's New Age shit. I'm sorry, but it is. I understand those who are religious and they think in terms of religion all the time, why that would come to their mind, but I think that's inaccurate to what Star Trek is usually about. Kahless is definitely a Jesus figure and the rightful heir, but that's a different episode. So that is definitely Klingon Jesus. I don't care what anyone says. I think it's very obvious too. Surprised not everyone picked up on that. But anyway, that is your Jesus story. This is not. This is clearly a New Age energy being evolving to a higher plane shit. So, and honestly, I always liked that kind of shit. I never considered myself into these New Age beliefs, but I was interested in them, and I was sort of a bystander of them. I talked about this when I covered Where No One Has Gone Before, so I'm not going to repeat it now, but I pretty attracted to that, and I thought that the way they handled it in this episode was pretty damn good, actually. I thought that the ending I always found really touching and always brought a tear to my eye. I always thought it was one of the more sort of touching moments of TNG, that this guy, he evolved into this energy being, and he was saying, that he's going to help his whole world and the whole people evolve to a better life, a better existence. And it's all thanks to the Enterprise crew. The way he said that and the way he touched Beverly's face, and it was like, I couldn't have done it without you. And I think Gates McFadden plays this episode very well. And again, this is maybe another episode I should have put when I was choosing the best acting performance for each actor, and for Gates McFadden I chose Symbiosis. I'm really regretting that after watching season 3, because I feel like I should have chose the high ground over that. But now I'm thinking maybe even should have chose this episode, because I think she does a damn good job. I'm starting to realize that Beverly Crusher was used better in season 3 than in the other season, which I hadn't realized before. And yeah, Remember Me's overrated and not very good, but I'll get to that shortly. Anyway, so yeah, and so the moment when I was talking about when John Doe is the glowing energy being and sort of touches her face, you can tell that she's leaning. As he pulls his hand away, she leans with it so that he could touch her just a bit longer, and sort of leans forward as his hand moves away. That was a nice touch. I think that was a really subtle, really nice touch. I don't know if the director thought of that or if Gates McFadden thought of that, but that was a really nice touch. And overall, I just love the chemistry that Beverly had with John Doe throughout the episode. I think he is by far, in my opinion, the best love interest that Beverly had in the show ever. Although she hasn't had and not counting Picard, because, well, maybe do counting Picard, because they kind of fucked that one up and didn't do what they should have. Picard should have been better, but they didn't handle this correctly. But other than Picard, like, what other love interest did she have? Odon from The Host. He was shitty. They had no chemistry, and I think that episode was dumb, and I'll get to that when I get to it. The Space Ghost Ronan from some person. Less said about that, the better. And I don't count Finn from High Ground as a love interest because she didn't have any interest in him. It was all one way. She did have Stockholm Syndrome a little bit, but that's different. Trying to think if she had any other love interest in the show. I can't recall any. I think that was it. I think it was just O'Donnell, the Space Ghost, and John Doe. Or Picard if you count him in the episode Attached, I guess. You could count that. But, yeah, this is John Doe easily the best out of those ones. Yeah, unless there's one I'm forgetting. But I think they had great chemistry. And I love how some people were sort of criticizing because originally it was supposed to be written as a actual romance, but they didn't. It was more of like an implied romance. But I'm fine with it. I think the way they did it was actually fucking perfect. I love the scene. And a lot of people really hated the scene. And my God, people just crapped on the scene where she was talking to Wesley about, oh, do I really feel about it, this way to him? And he's like, well, you said it, not me. I like that scene. Screw everyone. I think that's a good scene. And I'll tell you why. And that's something that really I identified with since the very first time I saw it. Because Wesley is, to me, comes off as the, it might seem weird that a mother's having a conversation with their son, but granted, this is a 17-year-old son. So that's for one. For two, Wesley's sort of playing the role of the son who wants his mother to be happy. So wants to play matchmaker and wants to sort of, and that's a common trope you see a lot in TV, that he would want her to hook up with someone because he wants her to be happy. And so when she was saying that, that's why he was kind of nudging her in that direction. And when she was saying that, oh, maybe it's not romance exactly, I thought that was a nice scene. I really liked it. Everyone was saying the dialogue was so awkward. To me, it rang totally true. So, I don't know. People are going to call me dumb again, just like they do for Alternative Factor or whatever, but I don't care. I really liked that scene. And it's because Beverly is trying to figure out if she actually loves him or not. And her feelings for him are a lot more sort of complex and not as simple as lust the way it was for Odon or the Space Ghost. Space Ghost. Oh, Jesus. Not Space Ghost Coast from Coast, but, Ronan from, what I'm talking about. The green blob thingy. Next, she's going to have it on with Slimer. Sorry. Anyway, so it's much more complex than that. And I think it's much more wholesome. And it was just I like seeing, I think Beverly is best when she's a wholesome character. Honestly, that's how I think of her. I don't want to see her having sex with a space ghost. I would rather see her in a wholesome relationship like this. And I think it's lovely. And I really like it. And I think it worked, that she wasn't sure of how she felt, but she knew that she liked spending time with him. She knew that she liked being around him. Now, whether those feelings were sexual or romantic or just strictly platonic, she just couldn't tell, didn't know. And I think that was played very well. So I think that's better. As I said, I think what they actually did in the episode is better than doing a full-on romance when they're making out in every scene or whatever. I think this was better. And as I said, the ending where, he touched her face and she moved towards him and she seemed so almost close to tears because she was so happy for him and so sad that he had to leave. And he even had that line where he's and I feel so much sorrow for having to leave you. That was lovely. That was a beautiful moment. I think the whole ending was just a beautiful moment. And as I said, it brings me to tears sometimes. I think it was, they played it very, very well. There was a couple reviews I was watching for this, not just Lore Runners. There's one other, there wasn't Lore Runner, it was someone else who I'm not going to name, who I was actually yelling at the screen as I was watching the review because I think everything they said was wrong. I don't know if you ever did that when I'm watching something, no, and would come up with the real explanation of no, and I would just yell at the thing. And I'm not going to talk about everything they got wrong because I'd be here for too long. But the one thing I did want to bring up was they were saying at the end of the episode where Picard had that conference with Troy and Riker and Beverly, and they were trying to figure out what to do with John Doe when the aliens show up and said we want him back. And Troy is like, well, you know, they've given us no reason to trust them. We don't have any treaties with them. We're invading in their space. We have no jurisdiction. And so the reviewer said that this scene was really stupid because they were just proving how wrong they were. And how stupid they were for not handing over John Doe, and they didn't have any good reason not to hand over John Doe, but obviously they should, and there's no, you know, it was stupid for them not to be there, and it was dumb of Picard for not immediately handing John Doe over, instead asking the captain all these questions, which he had no business asking because it was none of his business, as the captain just kept saying over and over again. And when the captain decided to choke everyone in the crew, he actually got up and cheered and felt out that they deserved to be choked for being so stupid. I don't know where to begin with that. Like, I don't know if I've seen a reviewer ever be so wrong. Okay, so first of all, Captain Picard has no reason to turn John Doe over. Hey, what about the simple fact that he's a fucking innocent human being who saved their lives and healed a whole bunch of people and doesn't deserve to fucking die? How about that for a reason, you non-feeling monster? Jesus Christ, I'm sorry. Seriously, no. But seriously, like, that's, of course they had. Now, I think that for me, I think that was a good scene because I think that Troy and Riker did bring up some good points, that technically they were invading their space. Technically, they didn't have jurisdiction. Technically, if they wanted to go by the Prime Directive, even though no one threw out the Prime Directive, which, by the way, it still applies to warp-capable species, just in a different way. It just means that they can't interfere in their culture, in their internal politics or their internal affairs, which this clearly is, because these aliens deemed John Doe a criminal, and they want to give him the death penalty, and it's not really their business to interfere with that and tell them not to for the Prime Directive. But, on the other hand, Picard has broken the Prime Directive before when it was the right thing to do, which, I'm sorry, unless you freaking have no moral bone in your body, you could probably easily should be able to see that this is definitely the right thing to do, is to not turn over this good man who's very clearly a good man, who very clearly did nothing wrong, who very clearly is not guilty of anything deserving the death penalty. It is the right thing to do to not turn him over. So, if anything, my complaint about that scene would go in the opposite direction. The fact that Picard was even considering giving John Doe over to those fuckers. Fuck the Prime Directive. I'm sorry. I'm the one who totally believes in the Prime Directive, and I'll back it up even in cases like Symbiosis and, Who Watches the Watchers and whatnot. But this, I'm sorry. This is, he's clearly done nothing to warrant the death penalty. Who gives a fucking damn whose jurisdiction it is? Do the right thing. So I'm sorry. That opinion did really... As I said, I've never seen someone be so wrong on a Star Trek episode before. Well, except for people who love Endgame. Okay, there you go. Or people who love Bada Bing, Bada Bing. But anyway, or people who love Tuvix. Okay, now I can keep going. So it's up there with that. It's up there. All right, so the people who love Tuvix are more wrong. Okay, I'm sorry. And the people who think that Tuvix was murdered, they're more wrong, which is the majority of people, to be fair, but that doesn't mean they're not more wrong. So those people are more wrong. Okay, but this is up there. Sorry. This is up there with those cases of people being totally wrong, that absolutely Picard 1000% should have protected John Doe, and under no circumstances, even if those fuckers threatened to destroy the whole Enterprise, no circumstances should they hand him over to be murdered for doing nothing wrong. And he's proven himself. He saved people's lives. He fucking saved Worf's life. He freaking saved, healed Chief O'Brien's shoulder and made Jordy confident enough to hook up. He's proven himself. So yeah, no, I'm sorry, that's wrong. That is so incredibly wrong. And now I've heard people complain about the whole force choking thing, and yeah, I will admit that's a bit of a stretch, that these aliens would have that much superior technology, that they were somehow able to strangle everyone in their ship at once. Like, how are they doing this? This episode never explains it. So yeah, that is a bit of a stretch, but I'm willing to hand wave it away and go with it, since the rest of the episode is so good. I am willing to go with it on that. So let me talk about Jordy and Christy Henshaw. And I've been saving this one because I didn't talk about this during Booby Trap because it's more relevant for this episode. So she is the same character who appeared in Booby Trap, who they went on the holodeck on and had the Coco No-Nos and had that annoying guy hologram playing the violin right in her face on the beach. And it is kind of inconsistent for this to be that same character, because in that episode they made it very clear that she was not interested in Jordy that way. But at the start of this episode, she clearly is interested in Jordy that way. So I don't know what changed from that episode to this episode. But yeah, who's to say? But anyway, so at the start of this episode, she's like, just asking, how's you doing? How's your day? And Jordy is like completely tongue-tied and can't really talk to her. And he's just like, yeah, okay. And then he slumps down on the counter when she walks away. And Worf is like, I have much to teach you. That's a great line. I like Worf in this episode. But, and yeah, that's another like great thing about this episode. This whole subplot I loved. But anyway, So what else was I gonna say? But all right, so yeah, Christy Henshaw. So he's very nervous around her, but then he has that transfusion from John Doe where he gets the glowy thing in the head that makes him like super confident all of a sudden, and he's able to see things much clearer. He feels much better. And when they're I like the scene when they're having at 10 Forward having drinks with Data and Worf, and him and Data are going on and on about the technical bullshit, the puzzle they're trying to solve, and Worf is like, let's talk more synthol. Like, which I think is a little bit out of character for Worf, because I feel like Worf is more of the more work than pleasure person. That's really how he's been portrayed most of the time, but it's still a funny line. But anyway, but Jordy is like, yeah, you're right, Worf, we're here to relax. So he goes over and hits on Christy Henshaw, and they go to the Arboretum, which I do believe is the first time the Arboretum was mentioned. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe there was another mention that slipped by me, but I think it's the first time it was mentioned on Star Trek, and we actually get to see the Arboretum next season where they introduce Keiko. But they're going for a walk in the Arboretum, and he's like very charming, and she's of course going for it because it seems like she really wanted him, which again, total character change from Booby Trap, but whatever. And I like that. As I said, my main issue with Booby Trap is that it portrayed Jordy as the typical tech nerd who can never score, and that was a cliche they never should have given this character, and LeVar Burton railed against this many times. And even at the start of this episode, they kind of portrayed him that way as well, as he was being all goofy about, being too nervous to talk to Christy. But John Doe didn't actually change him or give him anything he didn't have. And he says that at the end of the episode, and I think that's accurate when he says, I didn't give you anything that you didn't already have. I just, got you to sort of, find your confidence. And And so it's still him. And so it's still Jordy he's just more relaxed, more confident, and he's able to score. And we see him making out in the turbo lift later on. And so I love that. I love that portrayal of Jordy, and I think my biggest regret is that they didn't continue this relationship. Spoilers, we never see or hear of Christy Henshaw ever again, which is very disappointing. I think probably because they're being a bit more episodic. Although they brought her back from Booby Trap, they could have brought her back after this. But this is the end of Season 3. Next we'll move over to Season 4 after Best of Both Worlds. And entirely new writing staff. Ronald D. Moore was the only writer still on board. Although Renee Acra, even though he wasn't on staff, he wrote this episode, and I believe he came back. No, I think he didn't come back till Season 5, maybe. I don't know. But anyway, regardless, totally new writers, and maybe that's why they didn't bring her back. But I think that was a giant mistake. I think they should have made it an ongoing storyline where Jordy and Christy were an item. I think that would have added a lot of depth to Jordy's character rather than going back to making him the tech nerd goofball who's no good with women, which they did shortly after. And that way, maybe we could have avoided that whole mess with Leah Brahms and Galaxy's Child. But, God, that episode was... we would way better off without that. Anyway... and the whole thing's way better than the whole Leah Brahms thing, hologram and booby trap. That was just weird and disgusting. This is better. This was the better storyline, which is why I like this episode better than Booby Trap. Spoilers, I don't know why other people don't like this episode better than Booby Trap. This was much better. But, anyway. So yeah, I love the storyline with yeah, I forgot to say the best Warf quote again. Sorry, I skipped over the best Warf quote of the episode. Is that after Jordy hooked up with Christy, or they went to the Arboretum together, Warf turns to Data. It's like, I've been tutoring him. Absolutely amazing, absolutely great Warf line. But yeah, I mean, we had the moment where John was glowing and thought he'd hurt people when he'd go on a hunt, and Warf fell off the balcony and died, and John came down and healed him, which I'll talk about more in the Patreon comments because there's something I want to address in those. But and that was all well and good. And then I like this sort of John being like very... All right, here's another complaint I'll address that I heard about this episode, is that, well, John knows not that he doesn't want to go back to the plane, but he doesn't know why. John gets the sense that he was running for something, but he doesn't know what. And people complained about this. Why? It makes perfect sense for me. I understand how some people would just be deposed to not liking the whole Amnesia storyline, which I'm not a huge fan of, but I don't hate as much, especially when it's done in a good way like it is here. And they never used the word amnesia, to be fair. They just said he can't remember his prior life. I'm fine with that. I'll go with that. It's not like the freaking Superman or Carl Clark Kent getting amnesia and acting like that's a real thing. This is some alien who was almost destroyed in the shuttle, so he can't remember anything. Fine, whatever. And the fact that, but he can recall some things. He can recall some feelings, and he gets a sense, he gets a feel when he sees, when Picard says, oh, we're going to take you home, that triggers something in him where he's like, that's a bad thing. I don't know why, but it is. I actually like that. And by the way, one of the things I forgot to mention that was really good about this episode was the mystery of the episode, which I think worked very well because we had the mystery of who John Doe is, why, and then we learn more things when he starts glowing and healing people. How does he have this ability? Why can't he control it? Why is he afraid of going home? It just builds and builds and builds, and I think that the payoff for the mystery is amazing. I think it's perfect. I think it's a beautiful payoff, which again, one of the negative reviews thought it was a shitty payoff. The didn't live up to the mystery, which I totally disagree with. I love the payoff. As I said, I think it's a very beautiful, very touching ending, which I think is one of the more touching endings of TNG. In fact, I just learned from reading Memory Alpha that the music they play at the end of this episode, which I always remember being very touching, very beautiful music, was reused in All Good Things and was the same music they played at the end of that episode when Picard came in to play poker, and that scene ended with the shot that zoomed out from the Enterprise. I didn't know that. I remember both pieces being beautiful music, but I didn't realize that they just reused the music from this episode. But that makes sense because the music they had in this episode was beautiful. So it makes sense that they would reuse it for the end of All Good Things. And they added a little bit of the TNG theme in the All Good Things version of it, though, which makes sense for the final episode. But anyway, I also want to talk about the writer of this episode, which was Renee Acra. I talked about this before in The Offspring, although I think that was a revisited, so unless you're a Patreon supporter, you probably didn't see that. Or maybe I might have talked about this in my writing of season 3, which was public, so you might have seen that. But anyway, so he wrote The Offspring as a spec script, but Michael Piller wanted him to rewrite it, but Michael Piller thought he did a shitty job, so kind of fired him and said, we'll take it from here. But then when it came to this episode, and part of it had to do with the fact that they were so hard out and so busy and so far behind that they had no one to write this episode. So he could have contacted someone else, but he contacted Renee Acra and said, you know what? I can see what you were going for in the rewrite, and maybe I was being too harsh, and maybe you just choked because it was your first time ever writing, so I'm going to give you another chance. You want to come down to LA and work on this episode, which was, so the idea that they had bought, they just had a vague idea of the Enterprise finding an alien who's near death on a moon who crashed there, and them using their advanced technology to heal him. And so it would be a case to showcase Dr. Crusher and advanced healing skills, which actually didn't happen in the finished product. In the finished product, she said, I didn't really do anything. But anyway, that was the idea. So Renee Acra definitely, took on the task, and he came up with the idea of because Michael Piller was saying, like, who is this person? Where did he come from? What's his deal? Why was he in the shuttle? Blah, blah. And so Renee Acra was the one who was coming up with the answer. So he immediately came up with the idea of having it be someone who was evolving into a higher existence and who was being hunted by his people because they were scared of that. And so he and the rest of the episode filled out from there. And so he flew out to LA, worked on the episode. Then they did a rewrite as a, God damn it, I hate this term, gang banging, where each of the writers came and took an act and helped rewrite it, and then they gave it to Michael Piller for the polish, which I've heard someone say in one of these reviews that this was the first draft of the script, which it was not. In fact, arguably, this script was worked on more than yesterday's Enterprise, which everyone says is an amazing episode. And now, I can totally tell this is a first draft, even though it's not a first draft. It was actually worked on longer and harder than yesterday's Enterprise, your favorite episode. But anyway, I'm just saying. Also, the other thing I got to talk about. Am I done talking about the script? Yeah, that's pretty much all I had to say about the script. Only that Renee Acra was talking about when he was working on the script for this episode out in LA is when The Offspring aired, and he saw it on TV, and everyone was congratulating him on that. But anyway, so the other thing I want to talk about is that people were complaining about in reviews was how cheesy John Doe looked when he ascended. And he was in like this glowy yellow thing, but it's very clear that he was just in this like latex suit. And a lot of people compare it to the Green Man from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I got a couple things about that. First thing is, watching it on Blu-ray, it's very, very obvious that it's a Green Man suit. I think it's less obvious because Blu-ray, of course, high definition. But I think it's less obvious when you're watching it in standard definition. Maybe I'm wrong because I never noticed it looking that particularly cheesy before in standard definition. So I think this is one, and this happens a lot. And I've heard other people talk about other occasions that the drawback of having a high definition Blu-rays is that some of the bad special effects or bad makeup or bad costuming, bad wardrobe or bad set designs is more noticeable in high definition, which makes sense because they weren't making it for high definition; they were making it for standard definition, and so if it looks okay in standard, that's what they go with. I think that they should have added. There was, I heard the complaint, there's nothing they can do about how cheesy that looks, which isn't true. If they added more glowy, made him more glowing, which is how I remembered from the standard definition form, I think it was glowing enough where you didn't see that was very clearly a gimp suit or whatever. I think that's all they had to do. If they would just added more glowiness to it, I think that would have fixed the problem in the Blu-ray. But that's just me. But anyway, I am going to have to, call out Lore Runner specifically because he was one of the people complaining about it. And I'm sorry, but you're the person whose favorite show is Babylon 5. I'm sorry I went there. I had to go there because that special effect, that suit is a freaking state-of-the-art technology compared to Babylon 5. I'm sorry. How can you love Babylon 5 and have the nerve to complain about the special effects in this episode? I'm sorry, but I had to go there because the effects in Babylon 5 are shockingly bad, particularly in season 1 and 2. They were way worse than anything in any Star Trek except for the original series, even season 1 or 2 of TNG. Now, to be fair, Babylon 5 had a shoestring budget, but the first 3 seasons of TNG kind of did too. So, anyway, sorry, but I just had to go there. Anyway, I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. This helped me continue with the channel. I'm very thankful, very humbled by your support. So I'll just give a quick shout out to Antarius Tetson, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Manijester, Joel Avals, Alessandro Migalacio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal Howes. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we do have a couple of patron comments on this episode. First comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, I've been waiting for this episode. I made a list of how many times main characters died in Star Trek and came back alive. Maybe you can make a video on this list. Be back later with this long list. So he comes back with the list. An average episode of TNG and what happened to Christy Henshaw, the woman that Jordy was finally able to get. Maybe she saw his holodeck program of Leah Brahms and asked for a transfer and moved to another starship. That's good headcanon, actually. I congratulate you on that. The real reason is the writers are shitty and didn't bring her back when they should have, but that's as good of an any-universe reason as I have ever heard. Anyway, I always loved the line by Mariner in Lower Decks. Bridge officers are always coming back from the dead, so let's count them. 1. Scotty gets killed and resurrected by Nomad in the Changeling. 2. Spock, the Wrath of Khan, and is resurrected by Genesis space magic. 3. Kirk into darkness. Who cares? This is the worst Star Trek movie. 4. Kirk Generations died from the Nexus where people are transporting to a holodeck simulation and died again in the same movie for the real this time. 5. Wesley Hayden Q killed trying to help Worf, brought back by Riker Q. 6. Warf, hiding Q, killed in battle, brought back by Riker Q. 7, Warf, Transfigurations, falls and breaks his neck and saved by John, a.k.a. Jesus. Not Jesus, but we'll get to that. Anyway, 8, Warf, ethics, honorable combat against the barrel and die. Sorry, that's a great description. Honorable combat with a barrel and dies on operating table and then brought back by magic. Worf's twin brother, Worf. 9, Picard Tapestry dies on an away mission brought back by Q. 10, Picard, Star Trek Picard, end of season 1, and now he's an android. 11, Data, time's arrow, he lost his head in the past and found it again on the Enterprise. 12, Data, Nemesis, dies saving the ship and resurrected in Star Trek Picard. 13, Data, Star Trek Picard, end of season 1, dies again and brought back in season 3 of Picard. 14, O'Brien, Visionary, dies for real and was replaced by a duplicate O'Brien. 15, Harry Kim, Deadlock, dies when he falls out of Voyager and is replaced by a duplicate Harry Kim. 16, Neelix, Mortal Coil, dies from an electric strike and brought back by 7 of 9. 17, Dr. Colbert, I'm not sure which episode, gets his neck snapped by a fake human who is a Klingon. 18, Shax, no small parts. He sacrifices himself saving Rutherford, which was very emotional, and Mariner made a joke and will always have Tom Paris. Wow. 18 times, and I'm not going to include when the Enterprise D calls an effect, or DS9 Visionary, and Voyager Timeless. Even if you remove Wesley and Worf death in Hiding Q, that's still a lot of deaths. Season 3 of TNG is the best of TNG and my 4th favorite season of all of Star Trek. The top 3 that I have one thing in common. You may see the pattern. Number 1, season 7 of DS9. Number 2, season 6 of DS9. Number 3, season 3 of Enterprise. My rating is 5 miracles on the Enterprise out of 10. Alright, so yeah, I see the patterns. They're all serialized seasons, and I appreciate that. I think I put season 3 of TNG higher. I think my top 4 was the same, actually, if I remember correctly, but it was different orders. Season 3 of TNG was number 1. Season 6 of DS9 was number 2. And no, I think I had season 6 of TNG up there too, but then season 3 of Enterprise and then season 7 of DS9. Because the thing with season 7 of DS9, the reason why I wouldn't put it in my number 1 is because the first half kind of lame. It was mediocre, I would say, would be the fair. Some terrible episodes, some decent episodes, some good episodes, but the second half of DS9 was amazing. But since it's only half a season, that's good. I wouldn't put it at my number 1, but that's just me. I appreciate your pattern because I love serialized story as well. So I gotta talk about this. Now, I do in advance beg your forgiveness. I beg your pardon, Stephen Kennedy, because I appreciate you. I appreciate your support for my channel. Long support of my channel. Very appreciative of everything you've done, not just Patreon support, but everything. It's been appreciated. So I don't want to offend you, and I don't want to be a dick, which I'm afraid I am going to be a bit of a dick because I got to nitpick your list. I'm sorry. I do have to, because this has to do with a long-standing argument I've had with my sister, which was never really resolved. It was kind of just agree to disagree because I think it was the most heated argument we ever got in over Star Trek. It was a live discussion we did on Lower Decks Season 2. I think Don Willie was there, and he was kind of looking very uncomfortable when me and my sister were like shouting at each other, like getting red and anger in the face, because I complained about them bringing Shax back to life, and I hated the way that they did that. And I argued it erased stakes in Star Trek, but she got really pissed off, saying there are no stakes in Star Trek, that characters die and come back to life all the time. And one of my arguments was that characters don't die and come back to life all the time. And so when Mariner had that saying, and we'll always have Tom Paris, which, by the way, is my least favorite episode of Lower Decks because of this, which is why I got to bring it up. The line where Mariner, where is it? Mariner says, bridge officers are always come back from the dead. Bullshit, they are. Anyway, so I'm going to have to nitpick your list. Again, I apologize, but I don't think it's entirely accurate. So the first thing I'll say, which maybe not concerned to you, Stephen, but it's concerned to my sister, the argument I've had with her. The first thing I had to say is there are only 3 examples on your list that the character died in one episode and was brought back to life in a later episode. And I think that makes a hell of a difference. And anyone who says who doesn't is wrong. It makes the whole difference in the world. Because having a character die and come back 2 seconds later, whoop-de-doo. Like, that doesn't, who cares? And if they die and come back 5 minutes later, again, whoop-de-doo, who cares? Like, it's a much bigger, that doesn't diminish the stakes at all, but it's a much bigger difference when you have a character die and the episode ends and they make a big deal, they play dramatic music, they make you cry, they make it a tear-jerking moment, it's a huge sacrifice, episode's over. And then a couple episodes later, they're back to life. Now, caveats. So there's only 3 examples when they actually do that. There is Spock, and Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. There is Kober. I forgot about Kober before. But yeah, Kober is another example. He's the second example. And the third example is Shax in Lower Decks. Now, this is more about the argument I've had with my sister than is about your list. That makes a difference, because when a character dies and then comes back in the same episode, that's fine. I got no issue with that. That's because you know they're not going to die. You know that they're not overplaying the dramatic music and like, this character's definitely dead. You're like, the character's not dead. And they come back 5 minutes later and like, yeah, they're not dead. When the credits roll, you're like, oh, fuck, that character is dead. But that's something different. Like, for example, sticking with Lower Decks. In Lower Decks, there's the episode where fountains lie. Pleasant fountains lie, when you have the thing with Billups and his medieval Renaissance fair family. And so Rutherford goes on the ship, it blows up, and they're like, oh no, Rutherford's dead. Now, in the episode, they don't say that he's not dead. They are leading you to believe that he's dead. Even though, of course, if you're not an idiot, you can figure out that he's not dead. But that's not the point. The point is, they're telling you he is dead. A couple minutes later, they reveal he's alive. I had zero issue with that. Zero issue with that. Because they killed someone and bring someone back in the same episode. Perfectly okay. I have nothing wrong with that. It's a bit cheesy, but it doesn't bother me. Not in the least, not in the slightest bit. Shax, on the other hand, they manipulated their emotions. You played it like there was this huge emotional scene. Oh my God, he's dead. And then they bring him back to life and make us some bullshit joke about, I saw some mountain and whatever. And that's what pissed me off. Now, to be clear, and this is where I think I need to be clear when I say about stakes. And I feel like, to be fair to my sister, I think I'm not arguing my argument very well. And maybe that's what set her off, is the terminology I use with stakes. Because let's throw the whole thing about stakes out the window. Because that's actually a misnomer. Because let me clarify what I mean by stakes. Because in Star Trek II, when Spock dies, that has stakes. And when he's brought back to life in Star Trek III, it doesn't undermine the stakes at all. There's still stakes, in my opinion. So maybe I shouldn't use the word stakes, but whatever. What I'm saying, because it seemed like her chief argument was characters do die and come back to life all the time, so there's no stakes in Star Trek. Which I understand, but that doesn't actually address my actual argument. Because my actual argument isn't that they die and come back to life. It's how they come back to life that matters. Because Spock being brought back to life in Star Trek III, The Wrath of Khan, didn't bother me at all. I had zero issues with it. I have issues with Shax, but not with Spock. And there's a reason for that. Because how they brought Spock back to life honored Star Trek II. It was a reasonable, came up with this great character story for Kirk. In other words, they didn't dismiss it out of the hand. They gave it the attention and respect that it deserved. Spock died. It was an emotional moment. So if we're going to bring him back to life, we're going to make a show of it. We're going to earn it. We're going to make this huge movie about Kirk losing his son, losing the Enterprise, risking his career in order to save Spock. That earns Spock's resurrection. And the thing with Culber, I don't know. I was a bit more iffy on that. I think they kind of somewhat earned it because I think the show's better with Culber than without. But I also think Lower Decks is better with Shax than without, but it still doesn't excuse it. So with Culber, there's more than that. It's the way they brought him back, I thought was kind of respectful, and they acknowledged the toll that he was a totally changed person and that his relationship with Stamets. So they did honor it, to be fair, not by the way they brought him back, but how they treated him after he came back. That him and Stamets wasn't taking it seriously, and he felt like a new person, and the relationship almost fell apart because of it. So I think they earned it too, even though it wasn't as strong as Star Trek 3. They still earned it. They didn't earn it in Star Trek Lower Decks. That was my issue with it, and again, maybe I shouldn't put it in the terms of stakes. That maybe that's my fault, but yeah, the thing with Shax making some lazy joke about, characters die and come back to life all the time. It was some mountain and some bullshit, and who cares? That was disrespectful, in my opinion. So it had more to do with them treating the death seriously. Because Shax died in such a serious manner, if Shax was like, it was a joking death that wasn't meant to be emotional at all, then fine. Especially if it was in the same episode, then totally fine, and I would have no issue with it. So that's why the whole same episode doesn't matter. It really does. If Shax died in the same episode and it was a joking death and they brought him back and said that he saw some mountain, I would be A-okay with it. No issues. But the fact that they freaking killed him off and manipulating your emotions. This is an emotional moment. You're crying. And then 2 episodes later, he's back to life. Who gives a fuck? That is disrespectful. That makes me not trust the writers of Lower Decks. Let's just remove the word stakes. Maybe I was unfair of using that word. Let's take that word out of it. It makes me not trust the writers of Lower Decks. That's more accurate than saying that they will manipulate your emotions for no good reason and not justify their storylines and just do whatever the fuck when they want to fuck. Now, to be fair, this is the only case of Lower Decks I had an issue with, which is why I love the show again. The show earned my trust back with the rest of Season 2 and Season 3 and 4, which were amazing. They didn't do any of this bullshit again. If they did, then I would have to question whether or not I liked Lower Decks as much as I do. But they earned my trust back, so it's all good. But I still consider that the worst episode of Lower Decks, and I still disagree with Mariner's statements that, officers die and come back to life all the time. The fuck they do. Okay, so that brings me back to your list. Scotty gets killed and resurrected by Nomad and the Changeling. Alright. This is the same episode example, but I will grant you. Alright, so I will... Hold on, I want to keep track. So, Scotty is resurrected by Nomad. Alright, hold on. Sorry, I'm going to make my own list to get the correct count. Alright, so let's put that on the list. That is number 1. Alright, so what else have we got? We got Spock, Wrath of Khan. Yeah, obviously, like as I said, that one was totally and completely earned. So we got Spock in the Wrath of Khan. Alright. So next one, Kirk Died from the Nexus in Generations, where people are transported to a holodeck simulation. Died again in the same movie for real this time. Yeah, I'm going to have to take issue with this one. Sorry. Sorry. Oh, this is number 4. I skipped number 3, but I'll get back to number 3. Anyway, yeah, I'm disqualifying this one because Kirk didn't die from the Nexus. He got transported to the Nexus. Scotty and Chekhov misinterpreted that as death, but it wasn't actually death. So the fact that Chekhov and Scotty thought it was death doesn't mean he died. He actually didn't die, so that doesn't count. Kirk Into Darkness, Who Cares, is the worst Star Trek movie. First of all, I don't think that's the worst Star Trek movie. I think that's Star Trek 5 is the worst Star Trek movie, and even of the reboots, it's not the worst. That's Star Trek 2009. But this counts, so that will be number 3. I'm going to go ahead and put that on the list. Kirk dies. All right. Okay, so number 4. Oh, no, I did number 4. So number 5, Wesley, Hyde, and Q trying to help Worf, brought back by Riker, Q. Worf also from Hyde and Q. Number 6, brought back. Yeah, I know that counts because they were dead and the Q brought them back, even though it was like 2 seconds later, so I wouldn't put it in the same category as Shax again because it happened immediately, but I'm going to count that as number 5 and 6. Okay, so we're up to 6. Oh, no, we're only on 5 now because I took one out. Anyway, sorry. So, which one's next? 7, Warf Transfigurations, falls and breaks his neck and saved by John, a.k.a. Jesus. Now, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to take issue with this one, too. I'm sorry. I know. I said before, I warned you ahead I would nitpick. Worf could have been brought back to life by conventional means. Maybe so, maybe not. But if you notice, when Worf fell and broke his neck and Beverly declared him dead, Beverly's response wasn't, oh, well, he's dead. Nothing we can do. Let's put him in the morgue. He's dead now. Her response was, take him to sickbay. Get a revival kit. So in other words, they were going to try and resurrect him. So the fact that John happened to be there first and he could bring them back to life, that was like, I'm sorry, there's people in real life can die for a couple seconds in present day contemporary times, can die for a couple seconds, be brought back to life. Technically that is dying and brought back to life, but since it was done in like a span of a few seconds could have been done by conventional means, I'm not counting that. Sorry, that one doesn't count. Worf Ethics, honorable combat against the barrel, dies from opening on the operating table, saved by magic. He's not saved by magic. He's saved by Klingons having redundant organs. So he's not saved by magic. He's saved by plot convenience. But same thing. So, but I will count that, to be fair, because he was dead for several minutes. And even though it was a natural thing that brought him back to life, it was still something, they were kind of playing it off like he was dead for a good 5 minutes. So I'll count that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we got 6 so far. All right. So Picard, Tapestry dies on the way mission, brought back by Q. I'm going to argue with that one too, because it doesn't seem like Q brought him back to life. Because Q, remember his thing, he was going to take him back to the time period to prevent him from getting the artificial heart. But in the end, Picard chose to have the artificial heart anyway, and yet he still survived. So it seems to me that wasn't Q that saved him. That he never was really dead in the first place. Q was just fucking with him. So I'm not counting that one. All right, 10, Picard, Star Trek Picard, end of season 1, dies and now is an android. Yeah, I'm not going to count this one either. I'm sorry, you might call this one nitpicky, but he doesn't, I mean, kind of technically his body dies, but he doesn't really die because his consciousness is immediately transferred into an android, so I don't count that either. Sorry. 11, Data times Arrow. He lost his head in the past and found it again in Enterprise. This isn't really a death for Data, because Data is an android, and if he dies, that means he stays dead. So, but I'm sorry, but it's an android. It has to be a permanent, like, and it's not permanent. It's just they reattach his head, like 2 seconds after he loses it, so that's not death. Not counting that one either. 12, Data, Nemesis dies, saving the ship as resurrected in Star Trek Picard. Okay, so this one I will count because Data was blown up. Now, all right, I'll get more into this. We'll touch on this a bit more. So I'll count that. So we are up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're up to 7 so far. Okay, so sorry. What are we at now? So next one, Data, Star Trek Picard, end of season 1, dies again, brought back in season 3 of Picard. So I'm not going to count this. And the reason why is I'm not counting this as his resurrection. His resurrection is in season 3 of Picard. In season 1 of Picard, it's just like a program within a computer. So he's not really brought back to life. It's just a version of him. And even in season 3, that's not really a resurrection because they saved his computer and uploaded it to it, and it was combined with lore, so it's a version of Data. It's not really... Okay, so I'm actually backtracking. I'm going to erase the last one and not count Data at all, because that's not really death. So now we're going backwards and back to 6. All right, so... Sorry. So next one is... O'Brien, Visionary, dies for real and was replaced by duplicate O'Brien. I'm not counting this. Alternate timeline shenanigan, and that goes next for the Harry Kim as well. Because Harry Kim, you might as well count the entire crew of Voyager because there are 2 different versions of Voyager, but there were 2 different variations. So that's a weird sci-fi phenomenon. So one version survives, so in essence, they all survive. And just so Harry Kim happens to be from a different ship other than the other ship that survived doesn't change the fact that one version of everyone survived. So I'm not counting that. O'Brien, I'm not counting that because it's temporal thing. So yeah, in the alternate reality, O'Brien died multiple times. It just so happens in one reality he came forward like 2 hours back into the past or whatever, but it's still O'Brien. It's just because he's from a slightly different alternate timeline by 2 hours doesn't count. So I'm not counting that. 16, Neelix dies. Mortal Coil dies from electric shock brought back by 7-9. Okay, so this one I will count. That's definitely a resurrection story, and that's what the whole episode is about. It doesn't count as far as comparing it to Shax, though, because it's the same episode example. But it does count for the purposes of your list. So we're back up to 7 now, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep. Okay, so next one. 17, Dr. Crusher. I'm not sure which episode. Culber. Sorry, not Crusher. Culber, sorry. Dr. Culber, not sure which episode, gets his neck snapped by a fake human who is a Klingon. God, what was that episode called? It was one of my favorite episodes. I can't think of it. But anyway, yes, definitely counts for sure. Shax, I guess I'll count that. His resurrection was total bullshit. It was just a stupid joke, so I kind of don't want to count it because of that. But I'll be gracious and count that because he did really die. It's just his resurrection was total bullshit. But so that brings us, I believe, to a total of 9. So the real, or at least my count. Let's not say the real. Let's not be that offensive. I'll say my count is different than yours. My count is 9 and not 18. So half the amount that you came up with. And most of those examples were 5 minutes later. Same episode 5 minutes later. So therefore, I stand by my stance that Mariner's line of bridge officers are always dying and coming back to life, total bullshit. Standing by that. Anyway, 9 examples out of what? How many episodes were there in the Star Trek franchise? 1,000? Close to 1,000? And out of those 9, most of them were like 5-minute resurrections. Yeah, no. I call bullshit on this, and I stand by this, and I again apologize to you, Stephen, but you touched a nerve with me on this one. Anyway, so finally, God, that was a long time talking about this. Let's move on to Brandon Nealhouse comment. All the technobabble literally put me to sleep the first time I tried to rewatch this one. Why is Jordy moping around after Christy Henshaw like a schoolboy who shouts "girl germs" when he sees a chick? Warf's lines are gold. If they all need to stabilize the critical injured John Doe, all they need to do to let me start again. If all they need to do is stabilize the critically injured John Doe is to link his brain to another brain, why the hell did no one do this for Sarek 2 episodes ago? Because it's a totally different condition. But anyway, sorry. Because his is more physical. Sarek had like a disease. Anyway, sorry. I've learned to walk several times in my life due to surgery, but apparently the Enterprise needs no rails for John Doe's physical therapy, and Picard catches John when he falls. That's a good point. I've heard other people bring that up. That is a good point. When John shows up in 10-4 dressed in white jumpsuit and brings back memories of Spock's clothing and Spock's brain. But John's gear not only shows his codpiece, but the outline of his nipples as well. Yucko. I noticed his codpiece, but I didn't notice his nipples, to be fair. Oh my God, you killed Warf, you bastards. That's a good one. Anyway, John as Space Jesus was boring, but not as boring as Sunod, who can force choke the entire Enterprise crew even through a shield. When John turned into an energy being and left, I was relieved because this piece of shit episode was finally over. 2 O'Briens with dislocated shoulders out of 10. Oh, I forgot to talk about O'Brien and his dislocated shoulder. That's good. Glad you brought that up because that's a good point. This is the first time we see O'Brien dislocated shoulder on the holodeck, or we hear about it. We never see it on screen because money. But this is the first time we hear about O'Brien dislocating his shoulder while kayaking in the holodeck. And that they would do this several times in Deep Space Nine. I think 2 or 3. But yeah, this is the first when they mentioned it. I always liked that. This is something I always remembered. I remember DS9 episode where Bashir is like asking O'Brien why he keeps doing that when he keeps dislocating his shoulder, and he's like, "Oh, the river's calling to me." And Bashir's like, "Yeah, it's calling to you. It's saying, stay away or I'll hurt you." Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald. He says, "This is an episode that seems slow, tries to build on Starfleet magic and tolerance and understanding in spite of fear, and even has an inspiring type of ending. But, like Tin Man, an inspiring type of ending does not pull off an entire episode. First problem, the Crusher love interest that is implied. I just wish TNG writers can do more with female characters outside of love interest, which not only is prevalent with both Crusher and Troy, but even Tasha Yar, when we recall yesterday's Enterprise. Granted, that one was a good one for a relationship of the week. Then there's the Christ-like figure who is seen scientifically as a passage of evolution. In a way, this was a popular theme at the time, and I don't blame TNG trying to do something with it, but between Worf being resurrected and Jordy suddenly scoring with the woman who turned him down back in Booby Trap seems clumsily and making my eyes roll. And the way the characters come across this episode, where the guest acting really makes the difference, which also relates on a great writing. And while TNG Season 3 are more often than there than not, it just did not work for me. This is why when Lore Runner gave this episode a lamentation, while I wouldn't be that harsh, I get it. Finally, what's more important is this episode in this episode, is this the first time O'Brien has shoulder injuries from the holodeck and from kayaking, which is an important piece to remember from a much, much superior episode in DS9. I'll give it 4 evolving to Star Trek light beings out of 10. So I don't know. Like, I unless I'm forgetting about some Crusher romances, I only thought of 3 or 4, including Picard. So I don't know if it's fair to say 4 out of 6 seasons, because she wasn't in season 2. But 4 out of 6 seasons, I don't know if that's always making her the love interest. But I get your point. Like, they do tend to gravitate that way towards women more than the men. But I actually like this one. As I said, this is my favorite Crusher one. So you can get rid of the other ones, especially the, Space Ghost. But this one I like. This because it wasn't I like the fact that it wasn't a full-on romance. It was a nice, lovely relationship. So anyway, my rating for Transfigurations out of 10 is going to be a 9. Sorry. It's going to be a 9. Excellent. I was torn between 8 and a 9, and talking through it, I think this episode deserves a 9. Just like Vengeance Factor, and just like Vengeance Factor, everyone and their mother's going to disagree with me. That's fine. It's perfectly fine. But I don't care. I'm being honest with myself. I was totally puzzled. When Laura Rennie gave this lamentation, I was like shocked beyond shocked, and disagree with almost everything he said in his video. So we just don't see eye to eye in this one. Maybe this is another alternative factor example where everyone's going to disagree, but I don't think so. There tend to be a lot of people that hate this episode, but as I said, on IMDb, the rating was not that bad. So maybe I'm not that different for liking this episode, but I loved it. I loved the ending with, evolving. And also, by the way, the whole ascending to a higher plane, maybe that's what the Lower Decks thing was playing off of in that season 1 episode when they had that Tendi knew was ascending to a higher, and they saw the koala. It's a shame that they couldn't put a koala in this episode. I know Lower Decks came out way after this episode, but it would have been nice if they would have retroactively added, like, how the Star Wars DVDs added, like, Hayden Christensen into Return of the Jedi. They should have done that with this episode. Put the koala. But actually, this is different than the kind of ascension there. I still maintain that the ascension they talked about in Lower Decks wasn't really from Star Trek. It was from Stargate. Like, I don't think Star Trek really did the sort of ascending to a higher plane the way... Even Wesley as a traveler, that's not the same thing. I still feel like they were riffing on Stargate more than they were Star Trek, which they got to remember which franchise they belong in. But anyway, because this is a bit different too, because he didn't ascend to a higher plane. He remained in the same plane. He just turned into an energy being. So he's still in this existence. He didn't leave this existence and go hang out with the smiling koala. He just went back to his home planet to convert everyone else to energy beings. Because hooray. They're more like Organians. That's a better analogy rather than Daniel Jackson from Stargate. Anyway. So I can see this video is going to be one of my more controversial videos, but whatever. I'll live with it because I can live with it. No, that's a different episode. Anyway, that is it for my review for Transfigurations. So coming up next on my channel, this Wednesday, I'll be over on Patreon for Patreon exclusive for my Revisited for the Best of Both Worlds, where I revisit the review I have already done for the Best of Both Worlds, give my updated thoughts on it. Thursday, we'll be back on my main channel for a public video for ranking all the episodes of Season 3 of Star Trek Next Generation. Yeah, everyone's going to hate those rankings because of this episode and Vengeance Factor, but oh well. They're going to be way higher than everyone thinks they have a right to be, but so be it. You can check that out on Thursday, and then on Saturday, due to starting the poll winners for my Star Trek polls, Saturday will be I'll be releasing the Corbinite Maneuver Revisited, which I already recorded for my Patreon supporters. I'm going to be making that public for everybody this Saturday on my main channel. And then Monday, continuing the poll winners, will be covering Cause and Effect, which was, so jumping ahead a little bit for season 5, and then I'm going to go back to season 4, but whatever. So poll winner will be covering Cause and Effect this coming Monday. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check that out for that and many more Star Trek reviews and many more reviews on other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe, and thanks a lot for watching.